Hello, everyone. This is Brett, and thank you for tuning in to today's video. Before we get started, if you're new to the channel and have yet to subscribe, please subscribe. We look forward to interacting with you in the comments. Before we get into today's topic, I'd like to go around in a circle and introduce my guests. First off, we have Frank, who has become a fixture in recent times on the channel. Frank comes to us as the writer of the Systems of Romance music blog. He also writes for postpunk.com and is a member of the band The Harrow, as well as the curator of the recent Cherry Red's compilation, Cherry Stars Collide, which is a 4-CD set collecting tracks of dream pop, shoegaze, and ethereal rock from 1986 to 1995. Highly recommend this. Frank, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here again.
All right, next up, we have Greg Fasolino. Greg is also a member of the band The Harrow. He has written for Creem magazine, Fangoria, Faces, Trouser Press, Record Guide, Reflex, Guitar for the Practicing Musician. He's a music archivist, curates a YouTube channel featuring loads of concerts and rare recordings. Thank you for joining us, Greg.
Thank you, Brett.
All right, and our very special guest today is Mr. Peter Ulrich, the author of the 2022 book, Drumming with Dead Can Dance and Parallel Adventures, a memoir. Peter was the drummer of Dead Can Dance, performing on the self-titled debut album, the EP Garden of Arcane Delights, Within the Realm of a Dying Sun. Spiritchaser was a live member from 1983 to 1990. He's also recorded with This Mortal Coil, having a track on the second album, Filigree and Shadow, appearances on a couple of Wolfgang Press albums, a favorite of ours over here, the Peter Newton and Michael Brooks Sleeps with the Fishes album. He has 2 solo albums, 3 collaborative albums under the Peter Ulrich collaboration. Thank you for joining us, Peter.
Thanks, Brett.
All right, and then just quickly about myself, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, first time viewing, I've been doing this Life on This Planet blog, YouTube channel since about 2009, founding member of the band Audra, a member of the band Black Tape for a Blue Girl from 2001 to 2007, a current member of the band Unto Ashes. I'm a music teacher, and I just want to mention that Peter and I have a connection dating all the way back to 1999/2000, when both Peter's first album and my band Audra were releasing albums on the Project record label. We appeared on several compilations together. I've pulled out a few of them just to show. One of them being the Great Orphe compilation, which has Life Amongst Black Sheep from Peter, as well as an Audra track. It also has Tones on Tail, a song from the Sleeps with Fishes album. Another one is this Project 200 3-CD compilation, and Unquiet Grave Volume 4, which Peter talks briefly about in his book. Yes, so what we are going to do today is we're going to go around in a circle, talk. We're going to, Frank, Greg, and I are going to rank the Dead Can Dance catalog. We're going to ask Peter some questions about his book, his time in Dead Can Dance, his career, and we're going to also be discussing our 3 favorite songs from each album. So before we dig into that, I just want to give a brief background of Dead Can Dance for those of you that are watching this that are possibly unfamiliar with the band. Formed in Melbourne, Australia in 1981, they relocated to London in 1982, where Peter was recruited into the band. They signed to 4AD Records, releasing 9 studio albums, 1 EP, 2 main live albums, and a bunch of others. Have appeared on countless films and TV shows. Did I leave anything out? I think we're good. All right. So what we're going to do is Frank, Greg, and I are going to also be cataloging our 3 favorite tracks from each of these albums, and we'll put links to playlists in the description, as well as links to Frank's stuff, Greg's stuff, Peter as well. So first off, I just want to mention, I want to just talk briefly before we get started about Peter's book. Peter and I used to chat over email, 20 some years ago. And I reconnected with him and sent him an email after I read this earlier this year, because I've read a ton of musical autobiographies and biographies over the year. But this one really, I found to be incredibly special. The tone of it, the positivity, the attention to details. I also love that even after you left the band, you still told the story of the band, tracked their recordings, their albums, and their tours. So I thought that was also was really incredible. I also love the way the book starts. It's kind of one of those, one door closes and another door opens. And I find, like in life, and I'm sure we all share these experiences, where on one particular day, one tiny thing you do could just absolutely change the trajectory of your life. And in the opening part of the book, Peter, you talk about how you were working at a theater doing booking for events, and the theater was kind of having financial problems, was going to be going out of business, and you had to endure the stress of finding a new job. And the phone rings that day, and it was from Brendan Perry, who heard that you were a drummer. And here we are today, just kind of maybe based on that one phone call. Can you kind of describe what it was like, just to kind of, obviously getting that phone call, you really are not knowing what's going to happen, but can you briefly kind of talk about that moment and kind of like the connection to Brendan and Lisa?
Yeah, it really was very sudden, completely unexpected, out of the blue. As you say, I was working at this small fringe theatre in London, Riverside Studios, and I knew they were having financial difficulties. We were all expecting something to happen. And then on this particular day in December '82, we all got called in and told that the place was going under, and we were getting our redundancy notices. I'd made no planning for this at all, because we've been so busy up to that point trying to keep the place alive. So I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. And this incredible thing happened. The phone rang, and there's Brendan on the phone, who I'd never heard of before, didn't know anything about. It turned out that he'd come over from Australia together with Lisa and Paul, their bassist at the time, and a couple of other friends. They'd taken an apartment in an area of London called the Isle of Dogs, which is where I lived at the time as well. And they just happened to be in an apartment in the next block along to mine. And their drummer hadn't made the trip from Australia, so they were looking around for a replacement drummer. And first of all, a friend of mine went and auditioned for them, and that didn't work out. So he gave them my name and said, "Try Peter," and gave them my number. And that was it. The phone rang, and it was Brendan. And the rest is history.
Yes, as they say. Excellent. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask, before we start kind of our ranking here of the albums, and as I mentioned, Frank, Greg, and I are going to do the rankings. Peter, we're going to kind of just be interjecting here. To decide who's going to go first with the ranking between Frank and Greg, we're going to have one related Dead Can Dance trivia question. Whoever gets that right chooses whether they want to go first or second. All right, you guys ready, Frank and Greg?
Ready.
All right. For which album's tour did Dead Can Dance make their first US live appearance? Raise your hand if you know the answer first. All right, Greg.
There.
Yes, and just for a follow-up on that, which city was the first US stop?
Boston, maybe?
You're right.
Whoa.
Pulled right from Peter's book, The Berkeley Performance Center, on November 17th, 1990.
All right.
Excellent. So, Greg, are you going to go first, or are you going to go second?
I'll go first. Why not?
Okay, Peter, I want to ask you one other thing. Did you keep a journal throughout all your years? Because your attention to detail and all the information. How did you kind of compile everything in the book?
Well, as you know from reading it, I kind of part managed Dead Can Dance in the early days as well. So
right.
when we were on tour, I was handling all the cash books and all the contracts, and I still have a box file with all that stuff in it. So a lot of the small detail came from there. I had to, you know, be careful not to become too anal about it and not put too much in, but it gives it an unusual flavour to have all those kind of small details, and but some of it just web searching. It's amazing. It's always amazing how much stuff there is out there online.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it was just a combination of things, really.
Great. So Frank, Greg, should we do what we normally do and kind of predict each other's number one?
Oh,
All right. So what we're going to do is, like we often do, is just for fun, because, you know, this is some music nerd stuff here. We're each going to guess what our number one album is going to be, and then we'll reveal it at the end.
All right.
All right. And then
Greg
we'll
is off getting a running implement.
All right.
There he is.
All right. My handwriting's terrible on this, but I got it documented. So Greg, you said you were going to go first?
Sure.
So I should also mention that in this, we decided to include the live album, Toward the Within, just because it is made up of the majority of previously unreleased songs at the time. So there are going to be 10 albums that we're gonna rank. We're gonna start at number 10, and we're gonna work our way to our absolute favorite albums. So take it away whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, being that you mentioned Toward the Within, that I picked that for number 10. I don't have it on vinyl, so I just made a little facsimile. I will say first that I love every single Dead Can Dance album. There isn't a bad album or a subpar album in their catalog, in my opinion. So my ranking doesn't reflect, you know, anything negative towards any of the albums that are lower on the list. And this is a good example because this is one of my favorite live albums of all time. It's pretty much perfect. That tour I saw, and it was the second time I'd seen them. I'd also seen the 1990 tour that we talked about a minute ago. That one I think was my favorite though of all the times I've seen them. Just it was very magical, and so for me this album is kind of like a souvenir of that experience. The production quality is impeccable. I love the organic feel of the instrumentation. I recently rewatched the DVD last month and was struck again by how awe-inspiring it was. My wife hadn't ever gotten to see them, so she wanted to experience it. So I whipped out the DVD. The only reason it's at number 10 is because it has less original material, though the unique material on it is really top quality. Particularly, I'll tell you, the songs I picked were all new to this release. Number 1 would be Creem, which is one of Brendan's iconic songs, and Desert Song at number 2, and number 3, American Dreaming, which was like a really different kind of song for them at the time. A little bit more of a Tim Buckley feel, and it's a great album, but something had to be number 10, and I kind of just looked at it as well. It's live, and there's some material that I've heard on other albums, so number 10, Toward the Within.
Something's always got to be at the end, unfortunately. All right, Frank, let's go to your number 10.
All right, I'll preface this all by saying the same thing that Greg just said, that every album that Dead Can Dance did is a favorite, has been a favorite at points. I love them all, the full catalog. When listening to this, I listened to everything, including a lot of the 4AD outlier material, like the box set material and the demo stuff, and like the Hector Zazao track that Brendan and Lisa both worked together. So I kind of went really on a deep dive for this, and the one that came in last, I figured it would, and it still kind of did. And for me, it's Spiritchaser from 1996, but it's such a tremendous album, and I really enjoyed it more than I expected to this time around. For me, Spiritchaser feels like a natural conclusion of their first iteration. It has, you know, these long drawn out passages that kind of revisit pockets of what they've done before, also expanding upon it with a bit more of the quote unquote world music kind of vibe. But yeah, I really like how it's such a long record. There's only 8 tracks on it, but it really does go, it's sprawling in that way. And so yeah, I never really disliked it. And I actually, I've sometimes maybe not loved it, but I really loved it this time around. But like we've all said, some things got to come last. So for me, my 3 favorite songs on here, number 1 would be Indus, which has that accidental, whether it's, George Harrison, Within You, Without You, Beatles crib on it, but it's so good. Second favorite track is Snake in the Moon, really just like an upbeat, that's probably the shortest track on the record, but really great. And then Narika, which Peter plays on. This is Peter's last record with the band and is the opening track. And I love what Peter does on it. And it's a really powerful way to start the record. So yeah, number 10 for me, Spiritchaser.
Right on, Frank. All right, we're back. Sorry, everyone watching. We're having some technical difficulties, but we're all back. All right. So Frank just showed Spiritchaser as his number 10, and I'm now going to show my my number 10, and that is also going to be Spiritchaser as well. 1996, the 7th album. This is the only album that just didn't click for me. There's some songs on it that I really, really, really like, and the clear standout for me, if I can get the pronunciation right, is Divorzum. That song, which is the album closer, to me, it feels like a swan song. And it did prove to be the final song on the final Dead Can Dance album for 16 years. Such a delicate vocal performance by Lisa with just minimal instrumentation. That's my standout favorite. My second one is actually the 72nd drum percussion track, Dediche O2, which actually features Peter, Robert Perry, Lance Hogan, and Ronan Snowda. I can't even say it. I would love that track if it lasted another 5 minutes, because it's just such a nice little segment. Great track. And my third favorite, Frank mentioned, is Indus. It's got that really nice vocal interplay between Lisa and Brendan. I love the feel, the Indian vibes on it. So Spiritchaser, number 10. All right, Peter, you got some favorites from this one?
It's always a difficult one for me to choose favorites in Dead Can Dance, but I do like Indus a lot as well. And what I would also mention is that when we were doing the sessions for the percussion sessions for this album, one of the sessions that we recorded was then used for a track which didn't make it onto the album, but which was then used for a promotional CD when they did the tour in '96 in the States. A track called Sambatiki, which I'm sure you've heard of. And I really love, and I'm not quite sure why it didn't make it onto the album, but I think it's a great track.
Very cool.
Yeah,
very cool.
I'd actually agree. That's I was listening to everything on the box set that came out in the 2000s, and that track stuck out to me, and I was like, why is that not on Spiritchaser? So I'm with you on that, Peter.
Excellent. All right, that takes us over to our number 9 pick, and that brings us over to Greg.
All right, for number 9, I'm going to go with the most recent album, which is Dionysus. I love this album. It's beautiful. It feels a little more like a Brendan Perry solo album to me, or maybe like a soundtrack to a film that doesn't exist. So it doesn't kind of work as strongly for me as their other studio albums do. I do love the kind of ancient Greek vibe to it. Still very beautiful. I find that the track placement is a little odd for me, and that all the strongest songs for me are all in Act 2. I guess I would prefer if the song titles didn't all have Act 1, Act 2 before them, because I find it hard to remember which is which. But if I was to pick the 3 favorite songs, the first would be from Act 2, The Forest, which I think is a really tremendous track. 2 would be Psychopomp, and 3 would be The Invocation. Great album, just I like it a little bit less than the others.
All right, Frank, your number 9.
My number 9 is also Dionysus or Dionysus. I got to talk to Brendan. I spoke with him on the phone while this record was being in his promotional cycle. And yeah, he seemed to be very, I would agree that I hadn't listened to it since then, and he was very proud of it. It's very good. I really think it's excellent. We just talked a lot about the concept of it and the dual nature of the band and how that kind of played out and how it kind of like, it's kind of interesting to me how it took so long for them to make a record that actually acknowledges that head-on duality so well. But I still really loved it. I hadn't listened to it since it came out, like I said, but that's kind of my mistake. I thought it was very mesmerizing in spots, like really hypnotic. I think my copy has the same thing Greg was talking about, where the digital copy has like the act one, with everything's kind of strung together in act two. What I love about this song, this record rather, is that there's a couple tracks on here where they sing together, which I feel like after a while hadn't happened. There's like a lot of solo, like, you know, she's singing lead and he's singing lead on different tracks. And there's a lot more collaboration, I thought, across this album, which I really liked. It felt more unified in that way. And I found Lisa to be almost like really kind of feral on one of the tracks. Maybe that's the idea, the Dionysian rituals and feeling that level of like primality and if that's a word, primal energy. That being said, yeah, so just jumping to my favorites, not rambling too long here. Dance the Bacchantes or Bacchantes is my favorite. The Mountain is my second favorite. And like Greg mentioned, The Forest is my third favorite. So number 9, Dionysus.
Right on. And we got the hat trick. Number 9 for me, Dionysus. So the most recent album, 2018, their 9th studio album. Whether or not this will be the final album remains to be seen. You know, at first I thought it kind of agreed with Greg. You know, when I first heard the album, it felt like a Brendan Perry solo album, but I don't think in those terms now. I remember I got sick and at some point when this was released, and I listened to this album repeatedly as like kind of recovery music. And I really fell in love with this. I would love it if the tracks were separated, as you guys were saying. I never knew the titles of these songs, but I want to say that my first favorite, and I didn't even know what it was called until we were making this video. I just thought it was Act 1. And I thought this song always makes me feel like it's like some ancient vessel in a Greek sea and they're rowing it. And then I looked at the title and it was called Seaborn. And I was like, oh, wow, that actually conjures up those visuals. My second favorite is the track Liberator of Minds. It's got this great groove, the Mediterranean, Middle Eastern vibe, minimal Lisa vocals, and halfway through it hits this just beautiful vocal melody. My third favorite is The Mountaineer, which is the Act 2 opener. It has this really cool call and response kind of vocal between Brendan and Lisa. So that is my number 9, Dionysus. What about you on that one, Peter? Any standouts?
I like what Frank said about about liking that it was Lisa and Brendan singing together more on this one, and and that was something that certainly I was very happy to hear when I first heard it. For me, there aren't tracks that stand out from it because it's much more of a whole concept rather than other albums that have been collections of songs. This one, as a whole, it creates a mood, and so I wouldn't necessarily pick anything out. But it is a beautiful album that definitely grows on you with repeated listening.
Great. All right, number 8. Let's go with Greg.
All right.
Oh wow.
For number 8, I am going with The Serpent's Egg from 1988. And we spoke about this in an earlier video of yours, Brett, where we talked about our favorite albums from 1988. And it's a beautiful album. It's a very defining Dead Can Dance album with some of their most popular and iconic songs. So I can't really say anything about it that I don't love, other than it doesn't grab me to the extent that the albums previous or after do. It's a great album though, particularly In the Kingdom of the Blind, The One-Eyed Are Kings is my favorite track on there. Second would be Severance, which is one of their more famous songs. And third, The Host of the Seraphim.
All right, number 8. Let's bring it over to Frank with your number 8.
All right. I'm still kind of recovering from that one, Greg. Well,
Yes.
number 8,
Agreed.
which actually I think probably I'm going to shock Greg too, then, because we talked about this a little bit earlier. My number 8 is Anastasis, and here's my little facsimile printout. I think it's a great record as well. It's like their comeback, obviously after Spiritchaser, they took plenty of time off. It's 2012, so it's what, like almost 20 years, you know, like it's, you know,
16
something like that.
years, yeah.
Yeah, and so what I love about it is I love how symphonic it is, and it, to me, it sounds like definitely like they both kind of, which is true, they both had their own solo careers. Brendan did Eye of the Hunter and Arc, and Lisa was doing a lot of soundtrack work. And this seems like they kind of came back together, and we're still continuing that work, but just together under Dead Can Dance. And that's, to me, kind of neat. I kind of liked how that kind of played out. And I saw them on that tour the first time I ever, the second time I saw them on that tour, and they played most of the record, and it was tremendous live. So I want to say it's sounded great live. To me, it felt like a very nice Sunday morning record, like a Scott Walker early kind of vibe. There's a lot of like gentle moments on it, and never really noticed that until now. And so yeah, so my favorites on it though, just to jump to that, are Amnesia, Opium, and Return of the She King. So yeah, there you have it. Number 8 for me is Anastasis.
All right. I think my pick is going to be controversial, like Greg's number 8 pick. So, all right. Now, I also want to preface this by saying everything Dionysus all the way to number 1. I love all these albums. So, you know, this ranking thing is all subjective, and it's all tied to our own personal experiences. But my number 9 is going to be the 5th album from 1990, Aion. Yes, Frank's out of here. So this was the first album to be recorded at Quivy Church in Ireland, where Brendan Perry took up residence, and recorded all the albums from here through Anastasis. And I think, Peter, your Pathways and Dawns was recorded there as well, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And a more medieval sounding album. And here's my 3 favorites. Let's just get down to it. As the Bell Rings, the maypole spins, that heartbeat kick drum that you hear, the bagpipes, and then the outro is like the total payoff when the vocals pick up and Lisa harmonizes with herself. It's just sublime. Second favorite, Fortune Presents Gifts Not According to the Book. When you expect whistles, it's flutes. When you expect flutes, it's whistles. I mean, that's just like life, isn't it? Like just summarized in that statement. Third favorite is going to be Black Sun. So this is my number 8, Aion. All right, Peter, favorites from this one.
Aion was a really is very much a favorite of mine as an album. And interestingly, you picked the Bell Rings Maypole Spins track as a favorite from there, because that was when we did that. The album means a lot to me because it was the final tour I did with Dead Can Dance. It was the first time we went to the States, and it was really it was a sort of big time in my life. But that particular track was always one that I loved playing on stage. Although I didn't write the drum beat, Brendan wrote it, and it was actually played on an octopad.
Oh.
But it was just a great rhythm to play, and Brendan's brother Robert plays the bagpipes on it. And just the intermeshing between the rhythms and the bagpipes just used to blow me away every time we played it. And it was a real highlight in the set me. So yeah, that was that's a great favorite of mine.
Great. Let's go to Greg with your number 7.
All right. From 1985, Spleen and Ideal, the band's second album. I love this album. Fantastic cover art. It feels a bit to me like a transitional work between from the first album to the third, which isn't really a critique of it so much as just saying that's just always was my impression of it, where the classical and operatic kind of inspiration started to really come to the fore. It's a very cinematic album, which I love about it, with the choirs, horns, piano. It's a great album. Something had to be number 7. My favorite track on here is Avatar, which is absolutely mesmerizing. I love the rhythms on that song. Number 2 would be Indoctrination, A Design for Living. And my third favorite track is The Cardinal Sin. Great album.
Excellent. All right, Frank, you're number 7. Oh, Frank, your audio is not on.
That's okay. Here we are.
There we
My
go.
number 7 is Into the Labyrinth. And I have the original pressing cover here. I know it's been reissued with a bizarrely different cover because I love this cover with the hands. Anyway, so yeah, Into the Labyrinth for me. And so yeah, it's from 1993. It's probably their most popular record. I would say probably the most well-known, the singles, if you will, on this are still played to date. I still hear them out a lot. And it's mostly, I think, if I recall correctly, it's mostly just the two of them. Not a lot of collaboration on this one. And maybe the collaboration might have been good. But either way, there's so many high moments on this, though. I love the mix of traditional, like the beginning of the world influences, more, broadly speaking, and the Irish influences that were obviously probably coming into from Quibi Church and from Brendan living there. And yes, it does kind of sound like Brendan was kind of heading towards a solo career with Eye of the Hunter, which is a great record, by the way. I want to sing Eye of the Hunter's praises a million times during this video. And my vinyl copy here has both Bird and Spirit, which were tracks that were recorded previous to that for the Passage in Time compilation, but they fit on here. I didn't listen to this copy with that in mind. I did listen to the original version that I grew up with. So the tracks I picked off this one are How Fortunate the Man with None as my favorite song, which is so long and epic. And I love when that twinkling melody comes at the very end of it, after being repetitious. It just really just opens up and it kills me. Second favorite is Ubiquitous Mr. Lovegrove, which, I could just imagine all the girls in flowy dresses pulling taffy out of thin air constantly, even now, just it's all it is, dance floor Gothic staple. And then The Carnival's Over, another Brendan point on here, which is my other favorite track on here. Although, I gotta give a little shout out to When the Shakes the Barley, because it is very haunting. And the way Lisa sings it is tremendous. So yeah, number 7, Into the Labyrinth. Yeah,
Excellent. We always love when cats make appearances there. I want to mention too, because Frank has it over his left shoulder there. He has the 12-inch single for Peter's first single, Takaharu's Leaving, and such a magnificent song. The recording, the production on that I remember first hearing that. I think the compilation, it was a 3-track CD that was a Project Records. I think it was called Forward. I think it had that on there, and that was the first I ever heard of it. And I remember just being blown away by that song. So I just wanted to mention that, and that does appear on Pathways and Dawns, Peter's first album there. A brilliant track.
That's how I heard it, actually. I heard it on Pathways and Dawns first. I bought it just being involved in the project catalog, and I was blown away by the whole record, by the way. But that track especially, and then when I was just digging through record crates one day and I found the 12-inch, I had no idea. This is like kind of before the Discogs era really took off, so I had no idea this was its own single. So finding this was a real treat, and it's always been a favorite. So
Peter, did that song, did Takaharu, did that end up getting performed live throughout any of the years of live shows? Never.
No, it's never been performed live.
Wow.
No, none of my the collaboration project stuff we did a live show of, but none of my solo work has ever been performed live, sadly. I just never had the wherewithal to put it together, but I haven't given up hope.
Maybe someday. Yeah, would love to hear that live.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to my number 7. Love this album. As it was, after a 16-year hiatus, my Chicago is going to come out Anastasis, but it's probably Anastasis. The sound and the production of this album, the artwork, kind of like a rebirth going on. This was one of my absolute favorite albums when it came out in 2012. It got edged out. I'm a huge Bill Fay fan, and his album Life is People came out the same year. And these two kind of were just two of my absolute favorite albums from that year. It's hard for me to put this at number 7. It's just such a it's such a great return. My absolute favorite song, which is one of my absolute favorite songs of Dead Can Dance, is Opium. I just find that track just exhilarating. It's huge when it kicks into that groove with the horns, just perfection. Children of the Sun, it's Children of the Sun that has that dropout 3/4 of the way through, and then it kicks in with the horns, and it's just beautiful. My third favorite, Return of the She King, kind of Celtic sounding, 3/4 time, Lisa on vocals, lush strings, triumphant horns, just gorgeous. That is my number 7, Anastasis. All right, Peter, any standouts for you on that one?
Yeah, I'm very much with you on that. They would probably be the three songs that I would choose. But I love that whole album. I think it was a great return. I mean, it was so exciting that they were back with a new album after all that time. And I thought it was right up there with the best of what had gone before. I thought it was a wonderful album. And like Frank said as well, it sounded superb live. It was some of the live performances were absolutely tremendous. But what I don't know if I'm preempting something that you might say, but there was also this live album was brought out after Anastasis came out, which has got the whole of the Anastasis album on it, but also several other tracks. And that's also a really lovely album.
I'm glad you showed
Great
that,
collection.
Peter. Yeah, I'm glad you showed that, because we didn't include that in the ranking, so I'm glad you represented that one.
Okay.
If you don't mind me asking, like, performing with the band for 7 or 8 years, in our kind of collective bands, you never get to see. I always think, when I'm on stage performing, I've never seen my own band play, where you're actually in the audience like that to experience it. What was it like to see, to be on stage and then to witness it from the audience, and like just to kind of see it? Because when you're on stage, you're hearing your mix from your monitors, but to experience it from the front of the house.
No, I think I said exactly that in the book, that it was mixed emotions, but in some respects I was loving being in the audience, being able to see and hear what I'd never been able to see and hear before.
Right.
But in other respects, I would love to have still been up on stage doing it.
Yes.
But the point you make about hearing the sound through the monitors is really critical, because I think a lot of people, who have not had experience performing, don't appreciate that what you're hearing on stage is totally different from the sound that is being heard out front of stage. And because in your own monitors, you get a mix that you need to enable you to perform.
Right.
So you're not hearing the audio of that's coming out of the main PA. So yeah, that's quite a special experience, and quite strikingly different as well when you go and sit out in the audience and hear something that's a totally different mix. So yeah, very interesting mix of emotions, but I've loved being on both sides.
Right. Great, thank you. All right, Greg, that brings it over to you for your number 6.
All right. My number 6 is Spiritchaser. Obviously, I really like this album. I think more than the average Dead Can Dance fan does. It's one of my favorites. I think it's their most underrated album. I love the emphasis on the percussion and the sort of African influenced feel of the record. I always associated with, around that same time, maybe a couple years before this, I had seen the African drummer Babatunde Olatunji perform his Drums of Passion album here in my town of Huntington. And I always associate this album with that kind of sound, which I really like. Also reminds me a little bit in some ways of Peter Gabriel's soundtrack, Passion.
Mm.
I think that the only reason I maybe would rank it a little lower than some others is that I feel like the South American flavored material isn't quite as successful for me as the more African sounding stuff. What I particularly love on this album is the Song of the Stars, which is in my top 5 favorite Dead Can Dance songs of all time. I love the way, I don't know exactly what instrument it is. It might be like a bull roarer, which is like an Aboriginal instrument, but it sounds like crickets at night. And this song always makes me feel like I'm out in the middle of a field under the moonlight, listening to the sounds of insects. And it just, I just love it. It's so marvelous. I would also pick as tracks to suggest from here, Eureka, which you guys both mentioned, and The Snake and the Moon. But I really love this album, and I feel people should give it another shake.
All right, Frank, you're number 6.
Right. My number 6 was my favorite album of 1988. If you watched one of our previous videos, it's The Serpent's Egg. It's still number 6. This is how good they are. Any year that Dead Can Dance put out a record, it's probably my favorite record of the year. So I think I'd said a lot about it. I love how I find it to be very top heavy. Like the first half I really love, and the second half I really like, but my favorites are all in the first half of it, which are Host of Seraphim, which obviously has been used many times since, and both in The Mist, and it really kind of brought that movie to a new level for me. I know everyone talks about that, but it's amazing. In The Kingdom of the Blind, the One-Eyed Are Kings, which I chose for the Cherry Red compilation. Love that track. And my third favorite is Severance, which was also used in Miami Vice, which we pointed out last time. So yeah, and I finally realized the cover. I never understood what was going on. It kind of looked like it was a snake mouth here, but it's an aerial photo. It's a bunch of aerial photographs of rivers, tributaries, connecting together like veins, or kind of like a life force. And I always thought this album does have a lot of life in it, so like a lot of vitality to it, and it's got a lot of minimalism, and it's just basically the bare essentials, and just the way that veins pump blood through your. I don't know. That was a very half thought out thing I just came to right now, but here we are. So yeah, number 6 for me is Serpent's Egg. And actually I have a question for you, Peter, based upon that, or just based upon favorite tracks in general. When you were playing live with the band over the years, do you have any top favorite songs that you love performing? Like you mentioned something from Aion before, but do you have like a top 5 of songs you perform live over the years, and which ones really spoke to you?
Yeah, I always loved playing Wild in the Woods. That was a great song off the first album, which was a beautiful song to play live. Great drum beat. As a Bell Rings, Maple Spins, I already spoke about. Another favorite to play live was Avatar, which was very different when we played it live to the version that appears on the album. Because on the album version, Brendan used a zither to play the lead instrumental part, but when we played it live, he was using electric guitar with a lot of effects on. And we used to really build it up to a really sort of screaming crescendo. And it was a very, on the album track, it's beautiful, but it's very linear. But in the live performance, it used to have a tremendous dynamic to it, which I always really loved. And there's actually on that White Box album that we were talking about before, I think there's the version we recorded of it for the John Peel show in the UK, which is much more representative of how we played it live, because it was a live recording in the studio. So that would be an interesting reference point for anybody who wants to check that out.
Did speaking of live, with the the first album songs, a lot of those songs were probably played live before they were actually recorded. Did that happen when in your time in the band with any other songs that ended up getting recorded? Did they get kind of performed live to get worked out before they got studio recorded?
Yeah, they did. I mean, the Avatar's a good case in point, because that was actually actually on the John Peel session, it's called Orion, I think it is. It's got a completely different name. So we were working, it was still a work in progress at that stage. And then it got recorded for Splin and Ideal in Woodbine Studios as in a completely different, in the different form for its recorded version. And yes, I think we were playing Severance live before it got recorded. I'm not certain about that, but yes, there were quite a few songs that we used to work on live and before they were recorded. Yeah.
My number 6. I'm gonna go with Into the Labyrinth. Frank showed the original cover. This is the reissue cover. 6th album, 1993. Frank already alluded to the ubiquitous Mr. Lovegrove. I just, I have the same visuals as Frank. It's just a club song that the second it came out, it was played in goth clubs everywhere. So that's the immediate visuals I get. I'm gonna just jump into my 3 favorites. The Carnival Is Over is top tier Dead Can Dance for me. Just lovely instrumentation. I think it's one of Brendan Perry's best vocal performances when he says over here and he hits that high note, just really striking. And I think also it has to be mentioned the Joy Division connections with Dead Can Dance, and there's some lyrical references on this album, especially in the song The Carnival Is Over, where Brendan has a few lines that are from The Eternal from the Closer album. The procession moves on, the shouting is over, and then there's this little staccato synth part too in that song that weaves in and out. And it always makes me think of the song Decades, also off of Joy Division's Closer album. And the spoken outro is just gold. We sat and watched as the moon rose for the first time. It's just like, it gives you kind of goosebumps when I hear that every time. It's a perfect song. My second favorite is Ariadne. It's a 1 minute and 55 seconds of perfection. Lisa's vocals soaring, to me, they just wash over you, kind of like a lullaby. Ariadne was the daughter of King Minos, who helps Theseus escape from the labyrinth, married to Dionysus. So we have these connection with the later album. It's a beautiful track. And my third favorite is Yulunga Spirit Dance, which was the album opener. Exquisite percussion. You got these background sounds with little birds, which it sounds like it's being played in a rainforest. That is my number 6 with Into the Labyrinth. All right, Peter, any favorites for you?
I do adore the track, the ubiquitous Mr. Lovegrove.
Yes.
And it always used to make me laugh when I'd see Brendan really getting into that when he was performing it, and the old hips would start swiveling, and fun times. But an amazing track, I think. Lots of other. It's a lovely album. I agree. There's a couple of things of Lisa's performances on that, Ariadne, as you said, and I think was it Greg mentioned the Lisa's performance on the Wind That Shakes a Barley. Or no, sorry, that was Frank said that, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah.
So beautiful. But one thing I would go back to is. Well, I'll pick up on something Greg said earlier. I am so jealous that you saw Olatunji play live. That must have been amazing.
It was.
That Drums of Passion album was actually, I think, one of the first pieces of music that Brendan ever introduced me to. I'd never heard of it before, and it absolutely blew me away. And I love that album. Just absolutely one of my favorite. All time. Another good Dead Can Dance connection there.
You guys also in the year span that where you played, you had some incredible bands that you guys shared the bill with. Were there any just real, just like standout bands that you guys played with at that time?
Well, I was a huge fan of the Cocktails. So when we first signed to 4AD, we went and recorded the first album, and then as soon as we'd finished recording, they phoned us up and said, right, we're sending you out on tour with the Cocteau Twins.
Wow.
And I just thought, I'm in heaven. I'm going out. I'd only been in their band for 6 months or whatever, and suddenly there I was touring around Europe, playing live to good, big, reasonably big audiences, and seeing a free Cocteau Twins show every night. And I just thought, this is it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but yeah, I mean, I really liked a lot of the bands that were on 4AD at the time. So it was good fun playing with Diff Jazz and the Wolfgang Press, and yeah, I love those guys. Probably the biggest mismatch we ever had was when we supported The Fall, which I don't think we were really right for their audience, but yeah, it was interesting.
There was a passage in your book about Julie Cruz. You guys shared the bill with Julie Cruz, yeah.
Yeah, that was very, very weird because obviously it was on that first American tour. We did two dates in Canada before we got down into the States. And the second night was in Montreal. And obviously the tour had been lined up several months earlier. And Julie Cruz had been booked as the support slot for us. And in between that, in between the tour getting lined up and then the actual date of the show, the Falling single that she released went to #1 all around the world. So we're suddenly turning up as the new kids on the block in Montreal, having never been there before. And Julie Cruz is coming in as our support act. So obviously the promoters came to us and said, could we swap round? And we said, no, not because we were particularly bothered about the hierarchy of it or whatever, but just because we had a very complex stage set at the time and we needed the main band sound check. So on that night in November in Montreal in 1999, Julie Cruz supported Dance at the time. She was #1 all over the world, and we were nobody kind of thing in the realm of things there. So yeah, it was a strange one, but there wasn't really any animosity. But they just performed their set and packed up and left.
Right.
That was it. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. I think that takes us over to, is this #5, Greg?
It is. We're top 5 now.
All right.
All right. Piggybacking on your last selection, I'm going to go with Into the Labyrinth at #5. And you guys really said all the important stuff about this album. So I'll just say it's wonderful. And what I do think is interesting is how this was the first album. I remember at the time thinking that it was the first time that they did more traditional song structures. It was a bit more accessible to a larger audience. There were things like, as Peter just mentioned, The Wind Shakes the Barley, which was more of a traditional folk type song with the Celtic flavor. And that was just, but they did it with brilliance. It wasn't like they watered down their sound in any way. They just kind of expanded to include those more traditional song structures. So it's a great album. I'm going to pick the same songs that you guys picked before. So for ` Mr. Lovegrove, you can't go wrong with that one. #2, How Fortunate the Man with None. I love the historical flavor of that. I believe that's originally from a Brecht play. Fantastic. And #3, the Sinuous Ilunga Spirit Dance. So great album.
Right on. All right, Frank, you're #5.
All right, my #5 for me is the live record, Towards Within, which I have a vinyl copy of. This set me back quite a bit. If I remember correctly when I found it, and I had to get it immediately. So I'm on the record for not liking live records at all. I find them to be just kind of like contract fillers or whatever it may be. I know there's energy to it. I know there's people who love live records, and I've never really cared for them. But this is one of like the 5 live records that I love, and I love it dearly. I will go to bat for this any day. And we already talked about the DVD Greg mentioned, and he also mentioned a lot of the tracks that are not on any records here, and those are the standouts for me as well. The recording quality of it, also, like Greg said, is immaculate. It sounds so good. I think it was recorded in the Mayfair Theater in Santa Monica on that US tour that you referred to, and I think soon after that, if I look this up, that theater was ravaged in an earthquake, so it's no longer there anymore. So it's gone. But yeah, this whole thing just feels like part of the canon to me. And my favorite tracks on here are the closing track, "Don't Fade Away," which, similar to American Dreaming, was a very different style. It's very Tim Buckley or Scott Walker, very singer-songwriter-y, and it's nice to hear Brendan do that kind of thing. Second for me is Desert Song, which I listened to like 3 times today, just getting ready. And my son was like really into it and really kind of just jumping around to it. And I Am Stretched on Your Grave, which is I think it's a traditional song. I think Sinead O'Connor also covered it with like a hip hop flavor for her record. I picked out the 3 Brendan songs. It's not trying to be biased about it, because also the performance of Kantara on here is, like, I think I used this word for Lisa before, is feral. It's just really just otherworldly, intense. Like, it's like the spitting tongue. It's so good. So yeah, Toward the Within, number 5.
Number 5 for me, Frank and I merged once again. Toward the Within. We'll call this their 6.5 album. 1994, the first official live album. Peter showed that second one, and there are a series of other live albums as well that I think are available just digitally. So 15 tracks, all but 4 were unique to it at the time. I remember it was the fall of 1994, and I went by my friend's apartment, and I walked through the door, and this VHS tape was playing on the TV, and I just remember just like falling into the couch and just like entranced. They're not even talking for 2 hours or whatever it was. As Frank said, recorded at the Mayfair Theater in Santa Monica, which got destroyed. And I love like things about old buildings and what happens to them. So I went like in a full deep dive. Apparently that building, they kept the facade of it, and they just removed the entire rest of the building, and it's a shoe store now. So the outside of it looks like this ornate theater, and then the inside is some modern shoe store. It's just strange. So 3 favorites. American Dreaming. I mean, I find it fascinating also when these great songs are on a live album and they never had studio recordings, and that's just their place. Could American Dreaming have been bettered in the studio? I don't even think so. I think that performance of it is just kind of a perfect representation. I need my conscience to keep watch over me, to protect me from myself. Such a great line. Greg already, I think it was Greg, maybe it was Greg mentioned Rakim, I think it was. Brilliant track. At 4 minutes, the synth kicks in, Lisa's voice, it's just goosebumps. The layers of percussion, perfection, and then that definitive drum ending, and then the synths carry it out with Brendan's and Lisa's vocals kind of harmonizing at the end. It's also another kind of perfect song. And my 3rd favorite is Sanvian. It feels like a lullaby in a fairy tale land. Lisa would end up releasing a studio version of this on her first solo album, The Mirror Pool. But I also want to throw in one bonus, Don't Fade Away, as Frank already said, total gem song. So yeah, Toward the Within is my number 5. All right, I know we covered a lot of songs between the 3 of us. Go ahead, Frank.
I just want to point out real quickly, to your point about the studio versions, if you want a recording of some of these songs that doesn't have crowd noise on it, look to either Wake, the compilation that came out in the 2000s, or the box set, the same box that we've been referring to a few times. Both of them have like Rakim and like Gloridian, which I think is only on the DVD, and American Dreaming and I Can See Now, those 2 tracks. and it's I first like, oh, did they do studio? And like, no, it's the same recording, it's just they take the crowd noise out. So if crowd noise isn't your bag, those are the versions to check out. So maybe that's your closest you're gonna get to a studio version. They have the power. Anyway, back to y'all.
Excellent. Any that we missed there on that one for you, Peter, that you really enjoy?
No, I've got slight mixed feelings about that one because it was the first tour after I left, and they recorded it, or they made the video. So during my years in the band, we didn't do a TV appearance. We didn't have anything professionally recorded. There were a few sort of bootlegs on YouTube and that, but I don't have any video of any show that I performed in. So I was slightly miffed about that, but that's life. But yeah, of course, it's a great album, and we had been playing songs like Creem and Oman when in the final tour I did with them. So I'd had experience of playing those live, and they were great, very great fun songs to play live as well. So yeah, I'm glad they finally did the recording, and so we have it posterity.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of me that would have liked to have been in it.
Yeah, I remember reading that in your book about how there's no good footage, and I was scouring YouTube as I was reading your book, looking for there's got to be some live things that are just buried in here that show the band in the 80s. And unfortunately, there's really not. There's some video, and maybe the audio quality is very poor. But yeah, nothing.
Yeah, that's the thing. There are videos out there, but the quality is really poor.
Yeah, they're using the big camcorder VHS tapes, I'm guessing, at the time, with no microphone, and it's really unfortunate that nothing was able to get professionally documented back then.
Only for me.
Yeah, we would love it. Maybe someone will come forth with some some really high quality 60mm film that they recorded that's been in an attic for 30 some years.
If you're watching this, please help everybody out here.
All right, I think it's number 4, right?
Actually, before I mention my number 4 pick, I did want to say something about the not having recordings of things. But this is about actual music. And I think it's interesting. I think Peter mentioned this before about how sometimes there was live material that wasn't on the records. And I mean, obviously we see that on Toward the Within. But I was thinking about the very first time I saw Dead Can Dance Peter was in the group at the time. And that was at the 1990 tour of America in New York at Symphony Space. And that was my first time seeing the band. And I remember afterwards thinking like, oh, there was these interesting songs, but they weren't on any of the records. And looking at it now, it's an entire third of the show was songs that have never appeared on any of their albums. I'm looking at the set list now. 9 songs out of 26 have never been released. And I just thought that was interesting. I mean, I was going to ask Peter, like, was there a reason? Because there was 3 years between Aion and the Labyrinth, and I was wondering why maybe these songs didn't come out, because some of them were amazing, like The Serpent's Army, Andra Rice, Lindra, I Listen Gaza, East of the River, really great songs, and they just have never appeared commercially. So I was curious about that.
Yeah, it's not something that I ever really discussed with Brendan and Lisa, but I think it was just simply that at the end of their tour, there was then a kind of a long break, a 3-year break between the end of that tour and them really getting together to do anything again. And they were very much in their own sort of spheres, Brendan in Ireland, Lisa back in Australia. And I think it was just some of those songs that if we'd still been doing an album a year or an album every couple of years, they might well have gone on to the next album. But by the time they started working on the Into the Labyrinth, those songs had sort of, they drifted away from those, and their thought process was somewhere else, and they just moved on, and those songs got dropped along the wayside. But that's happened. There was one song that we always used to play in the early set, and I can't even remember now what our working title for it was, but I used to love the song, and that never appeared on any recording anywhere. And I was trying to find out, I think I had an old cassette tape of us playing it in a rehearsal at some point, and I don't know what's happened to that now. There was also a song that we used to play a lot in early shows called The Children's Toys, which has never been, as far as I can recall, has never been recorded or put onto an album anywhere. So yeah, it's something that used to happen quite a bit. We'd bring in songs for the live show, and then for whatever reason they wouldn't get laid down on tape.
Makes sense.
Interesting.
All right, well, on to
It's too bad.
and that is the band's third album from 1987, Within the Realm of a Dying Sun. Great album title. This was the very first Dead Condensed album I ever heard, and what got me into the band, and so I have an enormous amount of affection for it. I love the more complex orchestrations, and I think the compositions got more complex on this album compared to the first two records. The song that really got me into them was Kantara, which I think is the standout here. It is an absolutely riveting song, and I think it kind of symbolized to me what the band was about, in the sense that it tapped into a lot of early music and more of a primordial tribal feel. The fact that there's no real lyrics, it's glossolalia, am I saying that right? It just kind of said, this is this is a band that's different than whatever else you're listening to. So I just absolutely love it. If I was going to pick a number 2 song, it would be Summoning of the Muse. And for my third, I will go with Xavier. I'll just say one other thing about it, is that I used to think maybe that it was not a flaw, but just maybe not a less than ideal thing of the fact that one side of the record is all Brendan songs and the other side is Lisa songs. But I actually think that kind of works thematically, because it sort of represents that yin yang thing where you have Brendan's voice is so rich and dark and melancholic, and then you have Lisa, which is so ethereal and angelic, and that's the yin yang of Dead Can Dance in terms of the voices. And I think having that on one album separated kind of almost works thematically. So there's my thoughts.
Excellent.
I don't want to spoil anything. I like that about it, Greg. I love that about it, but more on that later. My number 4 is 1990s Aion, and like Greg, this was the first Dead Can Dance album I heard. I was at a poetry reading with my best friend Kevin, who we've had on certain segments for the blog before, and we were hanging out there. And we went to a party, and by party we were like a bunch of pretentious poets drinking wine. So of course someone takes us in the back bedroom and puts on Dead Can Dance. And I'd never heard it before. I think I was 17 at the time, 16, 17. And I'd heard nothing like it. I think I was just kind of getting into some Gregorian music. Loved classical, but didn't know that like there was a whole segment of classical music or medieval music that had just vocals. 16. What did I know? But I was blown away. So I think Greg mentions the first record done in Quibby Church. Peter's the last tour you were on. So the whole concept of this is the whole Northern Renaissance vibe on here, between the boss cover and the traditional pieces, Saltarello and Song of the Sibyl, which were all from that era. Kind of feels like that very unified feels like they were really going for the medieval and Northern Renaissance vibe on this, and it really comes through, and I love that about it. So yeah, having those 16th century pieces, 14th century for Saltarello, love that about it. So my favorite tracks, though, excuse me, number 1 is Black Sun, which I think is one of the best tracks they've ever recorded. I was really glad that they played it live on the first time I saw them, which is their first comeback tour in I want to say 2004 or 5. They played with a full orchestra, so hearing the whole thing come alive and hearing that song, it's such a primal song, like sex and death, that whole thing. Some Man of Fire. Just the whole concept of it is just, it kills me. My second favorite track on here is Song of the Sibyl. Right here it says traditional version, Catalan, 16th century. And it was dedicated in memory of Jamie Salas. That's the favorite. The way the two that Brendan and Lisa sing together on it is beautiful. And my third favorite is As the Bell Rings, the Maypole Spins, which is one of Peter's favorites. I love the combination of the bagpipes and the hurdy-gurdy. I find bagpipes to usually be kind of insanely loud and jarring, but the way it's played on here is so beautiful. And so just the interplay between that and the hurdy-gurdy, I love it. So yeah, Aion, number 4 for me. Masterpiece. So good.
Great. Number 4, Greg, you and I matched up on this one. The third album, 1987, Within the Realm of a Dying Sun. That's the thing about Dead Can Dance is the music is often just uncategorizable. Like if someone says, what do they sound like? It's just like, you're just kind of like, you're kind of left hanging, and you got to string together a long list of phrases to just kind of do it, because it's so diverse. And yeah, so my 3 favorites on this one, coincidentally, Peter played on 2 of those. Dawn of the Iconoclast. It's just over 2 minutes, starts with these horns that feel like a battle cry. Then there's just a low organ kind of pedal that stays on one note throughout the whole song, and you have these percussive accents, and it's just an outstanding, beautiful performance from Lisa on vocals. My second favorite, I think Greg just mentioned, Summoning of the Muse, also has Peter on it, 3/4 time. I assume it's like orchestral bells are being hammered and like quarter notes. Lisa's vocals give me this visual of like something kind of floating in the air, floating back down, floating in the air. It's stunning. My third favorite is Persephone, The Gathering of Flowers, the final track. It feels like it's in like 3 movements. The vocal melody in the final one right before the outro is so emotional. Lisa sings in a more kind of lower register, kind of more rare, funereal, cinematic, emotionally packed, yet it's really uplifting at the same time. That is my number 4, right? Within the Realm of a Dying Sun, amazing album. All right, Peter, over to you.
Okay, so I'll just give you a little anecdote about that I think is a really good illustration of how fanatical Brendan is about selecting sounds and getting the right sound for every element of a recording. So in Dawn of the Iconoclast that you picked out, there are, in the intro to that, there's 4 short rolls on a snare drum, spaced out. And Brendan determined that the kit snare that I had wasn't the right sound for it. So he wanted a military snare. So I had to go to one of the drum stores in London, order this military snare, which wasn't available from stock. So I had to go then to the drum factory in another part of the UK to pick it up and then take it over to the studio in order to play these 4 rolls, which are about 2 seconds long each. But it had to be for Brendan. It's got to, whatever lengths he has to go to for any sound, it's really extraordinary the level that he goes to make everything as perfect as he can possibly make it. And I think that's a really wonderful thing about him and the way he goes about making music. And people who love Dead Can Dance have really benefited from that. So yeah,
love hearing that detail. Yeah,
that actually tracks, because I think I spoke to him around Dionysus, and he mentioned exactly that he goes through meticulously looking for samples and digging through things just to find instruments that fit the mood and fit the time period. And even if they're not using the actual instrument anymore so much as they're sampling it, it still has to be that. So still the case. That's amazing.
I don't know if this was already brought up when we were talking about live songs, but were there any songs from those albums, from the debut all the way to Aion, that didn't get played live that you would have loved to played at the time?
The short answer is no, not that I can think of.
Mhm.
But it reminded me when you were talking about the album, though, that when you asked me before about ones I particularly enjoyed playing live, Kantara, of course, was always a big favorite to play live and always very popular with audiences. And of course, for a drummer, there's that great moment where you've had the sort of very atmospheric build up, and then suddenly the drums hit in. And you can always sense that sort of little gasp from the audience as that goes, which is, you know, they're kind of great moments on stage.
Excellent. All right, I think we're at number 3.
Yes, we are.
All right, Greg.
For my number 3, I'm going to go with 2012's Anastasis, which in preparation for this video, when I was re-listening to everything, this one just kept rising higher and higher, and I think it's just an absolutely magnificent album. It's an incredible comeback album, if you will, reunion record. Totally satisfied anything as far as I'm concerned of what I would have wanted to hear from a reunion album. It's luxuriant, it's enthralling. I love the enhanced Mediterranean Greek flavor on a lot of the tracks. My favorite song is Return of the She-King, which is probably in my top 10 songs by Dead Can Dance. And I always want to say, it's like when listening to that song, I feel like I'm in the middle of Lord of the Rings film or something. It's just totally captivates you, takes you to a different time and place. I also want to shout out to the orchestrations on Kiko, which I think are phenomenal. That's my second favorite track on the record. And for number 3, I would go with Children of the Sun, which is lovely.
Excellent choice. Frank, number 3.
All right. So seeing as you all know which the 3 that are left, Goth Kid, Get a Goth. And my number 3 is going to be Spleen and Ideal from 1985. And this is, you know, such a favorite. Even when I first heard it, I was kind of blown away by it. I think I heard it maybe my second or third record after Aion, and I just thought it was really a very imaginative record. Down from the cover, the Baudelaire references. I was obviously really into Baudelaire and poetry at the time, and I love all the deep grooves and repetition on this record. And yeah, it's still got that early, you know, it's transitional like Greg said, but it still has that, what I love about the first record and what I love about the third record. And it is definitely a bridge between those 2 albums, which are coincidentally going to be the next 2 favorites for me, for those playing at home. So that being said, my favorite tracks on here are Avatar, Mesmerism, which no one's talked about yet, which is a really great deep groove track with Lisa, kind of just the way the mantra is all over it, and Advent as well. So it's kind of like, I think it's kind of the centerpiece of the record to me. So yeah, number 3, Spleen and Ideal, 1985.
Great choice, Frank. Spleen and Ideal is my number 3 here. The second album from 1985. Orchestral, cathedral-esque. Yeah, it is, you know, it's, you know, sometimes I think of, like, you know, The Cure, like The Cure came out with 3 Imaginary Boys, and then a year later, 17 Seconds, which when you listen to them back to back, you're like, wow, that was a really short period of time between albums. And it was a pretty dramatic change. And I think to a degree that happened on Spleen and Ideal. But as Frank mentioned, you do hear some connections, I think, to the style of the debut. The Cardinal Sin, Advent, Avatar, they feel a connection to that debut. This tends to be the Dead Can Dance album that I feel like I reach for the most. I remember I was in Germany a few years ago to play at that Wave Treffen Festival, and I was listening to Dead, you know, in the hotel every night, just trying to unwind. All I listened to was Dead Can Dance in my headphones, and predominantly just to hear that opening De Profundis. Just when that kicks in, it's just so epic sounding. The cellos from Martin McCarrick, you know, from This Mortal Coil, and he's played on, you know, so many things. Timpani, trombones, violins, kind of neoclassical, if you want to call it that. Favorites, Enigma of the Absolute. I love the cello on that, just a brilliant song. I wish and I pray that there may come a day for a savior's arms. You just, me saying that, I'm sure you guys all hear it in your head. It's just, it was one of my favorite Dead Can Dance song. Second favorite, Advent. Brennan's vocals are sweeping, legato. Lisa's backing vocals sound like an orchestral instrument. As morning brings rebirth, a new day will dawn to ease our troubled minds. Turn away on your side and dream of days to come. Just a beautiful sentiment. The third favorite, that opening track, De Profundis, Out of the Depths of Sorrow. I mean, what a powerful opening statement to an album. It's like walking into this ancient cathedral, absolutely stunning. Yes, this is my number 3, Spleen and Ideal. And I just also want to also mention, as we hold up these records, it's like, what artists have just a whole catalog of albums that just stand on their own as just pieces of art. Like you look back at Greg over there and his backdrop, and it's just like such a unique, cohesive theme between those records. Just stunning art. Yes.
And they didn't use Von Oliver for a lot. I actually remember distinctly, is it true? Did I read this in the 4AD book? That that Vaughn was not really too involved with a lot of these. Is that true, Peter? Did you find that to be the case?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Oh, that Von Oliver, the 4AD designer who's done so many of the iconic artwork,
Oh.
that Brendan and Perry wanted to just kind of had their own vision for it and kind of went against the grain for that.
Yeah, I mean, we really liked a lot of Vaughan's artwork, but Brendan always had this, his own ideas about how he wanted Dead Can Dance to be represented, and Vaughan still compiled the artwork for us, but the ideas and the concepts very much came from Brendan. But I mean, something like Spleen and Ideal cover. The image for the cover would have been presented to us as out of a selection to choose from, and I think that came via Vaughan or his colleague Nigel at 23 Envelope, as it was. So yeah, we were working with Vaughan, but not just like a lot of the other 4AD acts did, and just handing over the album to him and saying, come up with a concept for that.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for clarifying.
The songs that were written for Spleen and Ideal, there's some that just feel like a kind of a dramatic shift in sound. Was that something that Brennan and Lisa were working on the songwriting and then presented it to the band? What was your perception of the songs and hearing kind of the style of the new album at that time?
Yeah, it is very markedly different from the first album and from the Garden of the Arcadian Lights EP, and it's very simple. That it was just a question of finance and being able to get together the accumulated equipment and the wherewithal to make that transition. So when I first met Brendan and Lisa, we were all living off an absolute pittance, just about managing to get by, and we just had our basic instruments. I had my cheap drum kit. Brendan he actually upgraded his guitar because Robin from the Cocteau Twins gave him one of his guitars because he was sorry for Brendan with the guitar he was having to use on that first tour we did with them. So it was very hand to mouth when we were writing the initial the early songs and making that that first album. And then it was once we got the publishing deal and things started to take a little bit that we actually had the income to actually go out and buy some equipment that then enabled Brendan and Lisa to start composing in this way. But it had always been there in their minds. I mean, they both had, like Lisa's Yang Chin and the accordion that she used, and they were always looking to bring in other instruments where possible. But once they had the access to this new equipment, he could actually write symphonically and print out music to hand to session musicians to come in and play the parts, like Martin McGarrick and such and so on. And it just opened up. But Brendan, you know, even when I first met him, he was already listening to orchestra. You know, he loved John Barry's arrangements, Nino Rota's arrangements, the stuff that Popol Vuh were doing for the Herzog movies and so on. So it was already, you know, well embedded in his mind. But it was really that, just simply the being able to acquire the equipment that enabled us to, or him to, he and Lisa to expand into that territory. But then, you know, for me as a performer, it was fascinating because then 5 minutes earlier, I'd just been touring with a little drum kit. Now we were touring with timpani drums and orchestral percussion, and the band suddenly expanded. I think we were up to about 10 or 11 people on stage at one time, with cellists and a 3-piece brass section and whatever. And I mean, sound checks were an absolute nightmare, and trying to get a balance between the electronic equipment and the orchestral instruments and so on was horrendous. But it was still an amazing thing to experience, and audiences, you know, really took to it. It got a great response.
Excellent, excellent. Just want to also, you know, mention again, we talked about it in the beginning, we've been referencing it, but for those of you watching, and Greg's got it on display back there, Peter's done such an amazing job of, you know, recollection from his time in the band, as well as everything that he's done since then. And just an incredibly fascinating read. So we're going to leave a link for this in the description, so you guys can grab this to hear more stories from Peter. So we're down to number 2. Is that right?
Yeah.
All right, Greg.
Whew. Number 2 for me is the band's debut album, self-titled album from 1984. And touching on what you said before about the cover art, this is one of my all-time favorite album covers. Certainly one of the best album covers of the 80s, in my opinion. It's one of those ones where it totally gives you a sense of what is contained within sonically. I have an interesting thing about this album. I was not familiar with it at the time, even though I was listening to a lot of stuff that was in a similar vein with other 480 bands, Cocteau Twins, X-Mile, things like that. For some reason, my local college stations didn't play this record, so I was not exposed to it when it came out. But I do have a vivid memory of, in 1984, going on a family trip up to Boston and going into Newbury Comics, this record store, and seeing this album on display there, thinking, wow, that cover is really intriguing. I wish I knew what it sounded like, because, you know, I wanted to buy it, but I stupidly didn't buy it, and didn't get it until years later, until after I'd heard Within a Realm of a Dying Sun. But once I did hear the album, I fell in love with it. It's absolutely stunning. What I like about it is it's really unique among all of the post-punk and 4AD albums of that time, and really incorporating, you know, a more tribal world music feel, especially the emphasis on the percussion. I love the drumming. Kudos to you, Peter. I love the bass playing on this album is particularly great too. And Brendan's guitar work. It doesn't really sound like much of their later stuff, but it's just wonderful. I noticed in Peter, in your book, you mentioned the Joy Division influence. I think somebody else did too. Was it you, Frank? And you can hear that on a couple of the songs, like Fortune and Threshold, I feel. But it's a fantastic classic album, start to finish. As far as songs go, my favorite by a large margin is A Passage in Time, which is just so regal and propulsive. And among all Brendan's lyrics, I think my all-time favorite line is when he says, "Spread your golden wings, let the sails unfurl." Every time he says that, it's like my heart just soars along with it. I just love it. And other 2 tracks I would pick at number 2 is The Trial, which I really enjoyed Peter's description in the book of how that drum track was recorded in different parts. And this album in particular, when I was reading your book, Peter, I kept going back and forth reading the book, and then, I got to go listen to another song from this album now because he does such a fantastic job of describing how the tracks were constructed and recorded. And then for number 3, I'm going to pick East of Eden. So self-titled at number 2.
Greg, I did the same thing when I was reading Peter's book. I had headphones. Dead Can Dance is also such a great headphone experience. And I listened, paused, rewound, listened to these. I wanted to experience what he was talking about. And I love the recording process, the songwriting process, all that. So when it's described, I'm such a fan of that. And Peter did such a great job of that in the book. Excellent choice. All right. Frank, you're number 2.
It's also my number 2. It's also my number 2. And I think, Greg, you did such a great job summing it up.
Yeah.
And I do think the Joy Division influence is prevalent. It has like that, it sounds so different though than anything else though that was coming out. Like, even though it kind of fits with like, like maybe the X Small stuff or Joy Division or early Cure, but like, it just, obviously the world influences using the dulcimer. I mean, it's the first time anybody had ever thought to, as far as I know, to put a dulcimer just in a record at the time, and it just works so well. I mean, there's we haven't really talked about like Brendan and Lisa being in different bands like Marching Girls for Perry, Microfilm for Lisa, and how like there's just like it was definitely like post-punk bands, and then how this record sort of really just was such a perfect combination of that and what they were going to do, and what everybody was going to do later on, and then I love it. I just love this record. I love how the reverb on the guitars. I love the drumming on the trial. Like I already talked about that. I actually, my first copy of it was not on record. It was on CD, and we're not supposed to rank it, but we're going to talk about it. We're talking about the EP and how good, they were just kind of like, it was like tacked on to the end. And to me, it feels like that this kind of belonged together to me. And one of my favorite Dead Can Dance tracks of all time is In Power We Entrust, The Love Advocated, another Brendan Perry track that is similar in vein. And just these two kind of go hand in hand for me. So my favorite 3 tracks, like Greg, my favorite is A Passage in Time, the bass line, and just that, Spread Your Golden Wings, so good. Second favorite is also The Trial, and I love DJing that one. It's really jarring whenever I put it on to turntable, and like people like are trying to dance up. It's just so it's so punk in a way, it's nasty. I love it. And Threshold, my third favorite on this record, but really it's perfect too. I love it so much, and I know it's not. Yeah, it's funny that we're all holding it. So I've heard a lot of fans, it's not their favorite, but goth's gonna goth, I suppose. So number 2, self-titled record, especially with the addendum of the EP on it.
Well, I would love to continue the discussion on that album, but I'm going with number 2 for The Serpent's Egg. 1988, the 4th album. Frank, Greg, and I, as mentioned earlier, we each selected our 25 favorite album. 1988 was just an outstanding year for music. So I'll leave a link to that video. We went into detail on Serpent's Egg. An amazing album. It has some of my absolute favorite Dead Can Dance songs on it. The Host of Seraphim being number 1. It's just perfection, top tier. Dead Can Dance. We talked about the scene in the mist in that video, and how just overwhelming that scene is, and how much more overwhelming it was made by the addition of The Host of Seraphim. Second favorite song is Ulysses. That hasn't gotten referenced yet. And back in the late 90s, for my English degree, I took a class on classical literature. And I remember, and as I was listening to that song, I remember doing a paper on mythological figures referenced in contemporary music. And I'll have to find that. I wrote a whole chapter in that paper on the song Ulysses. The song has 2 movements. There's that intro, and then the string parts settle it into the main section. And once again, it just kind of has this like ocean wave feel. An incredible song. My third favorite, which I think Frank, one of you guys talked about, is Severance. Another one of Brendan Perry's, I think, top vocal performances. When all the leaves have fallen and turned to dust, will we remain entrenched within our ways? 2/3 of the song is just organ and vocals, and then the last third, there's that blend of woodwinds like clarinets, oboes. It's just stunning. Serpent's Egg is my second favorite. Peter, Serpent's Egg, any standouts for you?
Well, Host of Seraphim obviously became a really huge track in the Dead Can Dance history. It's one that so many people know. It's been sampled by an extraordinary number of club and house artists and onto things. And I think it represented a point where it really, really Lisa was sort of coming to the peak of her vocal techniques, or really getting, she'd really developed her voice to an extraordinary extent. And Brendan, it was kind of a culmination of where Brendan had been going with his arrangements and so on. So that's always loomed large in the Dead Can Dance songbook. But overall, what can I say for the album?
Great. All right, so this is number one. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna do our little guest reveal here. Frank and I are gonna hold up our little paper for what we predicted Greg's number one is gonna be. I'm already incorrect because I put the debut. Is that Aion?
Yep, it is.
All right, number one.
Well, Frank was correct. My number one choice is Aion, which is the album that, if Within the Realm of Dying Sun was the first record I heard that got me into the band, this is the album that made me a Dead Can Dance obsessive, where I was just, I remember in 1990, I would just go to everybody I came across. I'm like, you got to hear this record. You got to hear this band. Like, this was the album that made me totally nuts about them. It also kind of spurred an interest for me in medieval, Renaissance, early music, which I hadn't really been exposed to much before this album. And I mean, Saltarello is such a great song. I went back and listened to the original done by a whole different kinds of ensembles. This album led me down a lot of musical rabbit holes, and I'm so grateful to it for that. I think this album is wonderful because it's melancholic and blissful at the same time, which is an interesting combination. So I feel like it's an uplifting listen, even when it's at its darker moments. Brendan's arranging and vocals on this are just out of this world. I think somebody mentioned before his vocals on Black Sun, which is my favorite Dead Can Dance song. And I think it's just stunning. I never tire of that song, and it's as riveting for me as the day I first heard it. My second favorite, I'm going to pick Saltarello because it's just so much fun and it's so influential, I think. And for number three, I'm going to go with, I do not know how to pronounce this, Radark, but it's a really cool song. So Aion, from the cover to the last moment on the record, is just phenomenal. Number one.
Great choice.
All right, Frank. All right, here's Greg. You got your paper here for Frank?
Yeah, I was wrong. I picked Serpent's Egg.
I picked Within the Realm of a Dying Sun.
Yeah, you are correct. I mean, maybe I'm on the record for saying
I don't think so. It just seems like your album, Frank.
Considering how dramatic it is, I think that's I don't know if to take that as a compliment or as an insult, but you're spot on. You're spot on, really. And it really is. It's my desert island disc. I would take this one. We've talked about how many times, how much we love the entire catalog. I would take this one and run if you made me do that, and I find it to be perfect. I love that dual nature of it that we were talking, the first half being Brendan only mostly, second half having a little Brendan, but like all these, it's really just that yin and yang, that Dionysian vibe to it. It's perfect. And something that we didn't discuss about it that I think is such a winter Christmassy record. It's the big bells, the gongs, like just the way it just sounds like like almost like like Carol of the Bells or something. Like something the Muse has that kind of vibe to it to me. I cannot every time I put this record on, it has to be silent. It has to be either in headphones or if anybody's talking over it, it's like it's like a religious experience. It's mass for me to hear this record. And my favorite 3 tracks on this, I think, Greg, they're your 3 favorites, maybe in a different order. The first favorite for me is Xavier, which is a Brendan track that's just got the simple like harpsichorded piano. I don't know if it's a harpsichord or a piano, but it's this simple melody. The way it opens up, I wanted to sing it for a high school chorus recital. I had these big designs of me trying to do this song, and the piano teacher was like, "No, you're not doing that." I'm like, probably for the best that you didn't. But I know they were touring recently. I heard that tour got canceled and all that, but they were performing a lot of these older songs, and having had this song come back out again and seeing that it was back in the set lists was, I almost flew to Europe just to hear it. But sadly, it didn't make it over the States. So Xavier is my first favorite. Second favorite, we've all talked about, Summoning the Muse. That very wintry, dark Christmas vibe to it. And kudos to your performance on that, Peter. And my third favorite is Kantara, which, obviously in the Dead Can Dance pantheon is a masterpiece. But really, everything on here, it's just such a good listen. And if you haven't heard it, and if you skip this one, dear listeners and viewers, please just do this and put the lights down low, put a candle on, put some headphones in, just blast it as loud as you can. I think I put it on at 8 a.m. the other night to revisit it, not that I needed to. And sorry, neighbors, not sorry at all. Number 1.
Great choice, Frank. And just as a reminder to you guys watching, as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be, each of us are going to have our own playlist where we collect the 3 songs that we chose from each album, so you can listen into our selections for favorites. All right, that brings it around to my number 1. What did you guys predict for me?
I was wrong.
You went with Aion, huh? And Frank, looks like you got me right.
Woo! I got you both right.
All right. My number 1 is going to be the 1984 debut. Frank, you said something. I think Greg, you said it because you guys talked about it back to back. There was nothing like this album. Like, even though it's more in the kind of, if you can, air quote and say rock based, there's just nothing else like it. There's some like Joy Division references that I pick up from like the kind of Peter Hooky style strummed bass chordal motions, and a few things that I'll allude to as well. But really nothing else sounds like this. I find it such an intriguing listen from when it just, the immediacy of it starting. It's really hard for me to pick favorites on this. But I'm going to also mention that, we talked about how Spleen and Ideal was a pretty dramatic departure from the debut, but I think you do still get glimpses of what was to come on songs like Ocean, Frontier, Musica Eternal. I think you get touches of what's to come. I love the drum, the guitar, and the bass interplay. It's always intriguing. That swing feel on East of Eden gives it almost like a jazzy kind of swing feel. I love. So let's get into the favorites. all three of us have the number 1. A Passage in Time is the namesake for that 1991 USA compilation. And I feel like that was my first Dead Can Dance experience, was that compilation. The guitar playing on that one, there's some like little shredding that goes on in those couple of sections, and I just wait for that. I had that on this morning. Sarah and I were drinking our coffee, and I was just like frozen in the kitchen, just waiting for that little guitar shred that happens in that song. It's so good. Fortune is such an interesting song. You have that 2-note bass line, which goes from D to C, which is reminiscent of Joy Division's Transmission. That's what it kind of reminds me of, kind of, and I feel like it's in the same key. All this really cool percussion going on every now and then. And I'm trying to count, you know, being a music teacher and like digging into theory, and I'm counting rhythms. And every now and then you hear these fast couple of little snare drum hits that feel like these like electric shocks. And I'm wondering, you know, Peter, when you guys played that song live, you just knew the song obviously was, you had it so ingrained in you. But I'm trying to count as I listen to that, figuring out where those little snare drum hits are. And I'm just always wrong every time I listen to that song. Top-notch track. The bass playing is great. And my third favorite is Threshold, which gives me kind of Atrocity Exhibition vibes from Joy Division a little bit. 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4 and bum bum da 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 bum bum da da. That drum beat on that is just great. The strum bass line, like Peter Hook, the jagged chords, and then there's that guitar riff that comes in there, and it reminds me of like early Susie and the Banshees. Lisa's vocals are haunting, total gem. But that was difficult to just pin that one down to 3, because I think that album from beginning to end is just so top notch. That is my number 1, the debut.
I have a question for Peter.
Yes.
About the debut and just that era of stuff. You know, so I haven't had a chance to read the book. I picked it up on my Kindle. I'm looking forward to diving in after we all talk and kind of getting the firsthand. So I'm sure you cover it in there. But what you know, what was your, you know, once you started picking up different percussion, like what was your experience as a drummer? Had you were you kind of more of a traditional drummer that kind of picked up more interesting percussion elements from working with this band, or, you know, just tell me a bit about how that, you know, your world of choosing instruments and sounds yourself, you know?
Okay, so my very first introduction to drum, the first drums I ever had were a pair of sort of ethnic bongo drums that my grandparents brought back from a foreign trip when I was about 10 years old, and they were just they were an amazing thing to me. I couldn't believe it. You know, I'd never seen or smelt or heard anything like them before. And then that sort of in turn got me interested in drums, and you know, I then got a standard kit, learned to play. So the bongos got kind of put away, but they were always there in the background. But before I met Brendan and Lisa, my only real experience of playing in the band was playing in a sort of blues soul covers band. So I was just playing standards and basic stuff. So I was listening to a lot of, or I just recently started listening to a lot more African music in particular, and some Middle Eastern music, and I loved the rhythms, but didn't really, I hadn't really thought too much about how they were created or what instrumentation was being used. And then, of course, I met Brendan and Lisa, and suddenly here I was with people who were actually knew about these instruments, were looking at these arrangements, looking at bringing in different types of percussion and instrumentation, and it was like a real wow moment. But what's interesting about what Brett was saying about the way the drums and the percussion are used on that first album is that Brendan basically had to break me of all my old habits of being a drummer. Playing the kind of standards because Brendan always thinks out of the box. He's always looking to do things in a different way. And I was just used to sitting in a pub, just bashing out a beat, doing a little roll around the drums every so often, hitting the crash cymbal at the end of every round kind of thing. And Brendan doesn't have, immediately dispelled any of that. There's no room for that kind of laziness in Dead Can Dance. So what you were saying, bro, about looking for where the beats are going to come in, that was all completely directed by Brendan. He was fanatical about the way the dynamics of a song had to be created by using these beats in a particular way. And I think I mentioned in the book the fact that around that time, in an entire Dead Can Dance set, I would hit the crash cymbal once. So when it was hit, the effect was very dramatic, because most drummers are hitting the crash cymbal every 10 seconds or whatever. So it just becomes a blur. But this was all under Brendan's direction, and it was a really amazing and mind-opening experience. And I'm forever thankful for him for breaking me out of all those old bad habits, and both him and Lisa made me think about how to construct music and how to look for the spaces in music, and so much. So yeah, for me, there's all those emotions bound up in that album. So naturally, that album's very special to me. But also, I would say about that first album, I think you've all picked up in what you've been saying about it, that the interplay between guitar, bass, and drums is very is really interesting on that album. And Brendan is both an excellent bassist and guitarist. And in a way, there's a slight sadness that a lot of that got dropped in order to take us into the orchestral world and the other worlds of Dead Can Dance that came later on. Still amazing music and an incredible band to be involved with, but some of that early stuff, the rawness of it, with the guitar, bass, drums was also really, really interesting and really great to play. And I'd agree with what you said. Yeah, really very different from anything else that was around at the time.
Peter, so coming from that experience and then doing your own solo work, just going into like Pathways and Dawns, what background did you have in songwriting up until that point, and how was that kind of crossover going from playing drums, percussion in the band to then creating your own album of material from the whole songwriting process?
Yeah, I'd always written songs since I was a teenager, and I'd always enjoyed the creative process. And obviously, one of the elements of being in Dead Can Dance was that with Brendan and Lisa in the same band, it was absolutely bursting at the seams with creativity and ideas, and there wasn't really any room I was always playing catch up with them. I was learning from them all the time. So there wasn't a space for my ideas within Dead Can Dance. So yeah, it was always, once I had the wherewithal to start writing a bit myself, it was a process that came fairly readily to me, and also one that I'd long wanted to pursue. So it wasn't something that I had to really think that hard about or plan that for. It was quite a sort of natural, organic process.
Excellent. I assume, and I know you talked about it in your book, the Sleeps with the Fishes album. I assume the connection was with Peter Newton, because you guys played with Clan of Zymox back then. Can you walk us through like your involvement on that, how you got asked to play on this, your experience of it?
Yeah, we actually met on that first tour we did in the Netherlands with the Cocteau Twins. We actually met they were just called Zymox when we first met them, and we were just in a cafe after I think we waited to do our sound check, or we'd done our sound check, and we went out to grab a coffee or something, and we were sitting in a cafe, and these guys came up and started chatting to us, and it was Ronnie and Anka, and I can't remember who else was there, but and so anyway, they gave us a couple of copies of their Muscovite Mosquito 4-track EP that they'd done at the time. And we took it away and liked it, and so Brendan passed on a copy to Ivo, and Ivo ended up signing them. So it was kind of through just meeting them in a coffee bar in the middle of Holland somewhere. But then they came over we were supposed to have an 8-day tour of the UK that they were coming over to support us for. And for whatever reason, shows kept dropping out of the schedule, and we ended up with only 2 shows out of what was within these 8. So they still came over, but they now had no budget for staying anywhere or whatever. So they all slept on the floor in the living room of my girlfriend's flat. So I kind of, got thrown together with them, or they got thrown together with us, and we became good friends. And then, of course, they went their way, did their thing, and we were doing ours. And although we were aware of what they were doing, our paths didn't really cross again. And then at the time, I think there was only me and Richard Thomas in Diff Juzz were the only 2 drummers on the 4AD label. It could be because it was mostly bands that either didn't use drums or they were using drum machines. And I think maybe even Diff Juzz had sort of gone separate ways by the time Peter did his album with Michael Brook. So if anyone from the kind of 4AD stable wanted a bit of drums and percussion played on one of the albums, Ivo would just get on the phone to either me or Richard, and in this case it was Peter needed this, some percussion on one of his tracks, so I got a phone call from Ivo. So as simple as that, really.
Wow, very cool, very cool. Well, this is a fantastic How often do you revisit and listen back to some of this stuff that you were a part of back then?
I have to say very rarely, because I'm always looking for new sounds in music, and I tend to just be listening to as much new stuff as I can all the time. So I don't often revisit, but there are certain albums. I mean, that is a beautiful album, Peter's album, but if ever I'm asked to say, Dead Can Dance, what were your favorites from 4AD back in the day?
Yeah.
One of the albums that always comes straight to mind is Diff Juzz's Extractions album.
Yes. And
that's one that I still go and pull out of the rack every so often and put on, and it's always great to hear it again. So yeah, probably not as much as I should do, but yeah.
Gotcha. The Peter Ulrich collaboration albums, the third one, 2019 Final Reflection, is the final indicative that's the final in a series, or should we expect that there's going to be some new work coming out?
No, we decided to do a trilogy of albums. It started off just as a one-off track, and then it was going to be a 4-track EP, and then it was just, we were all enjoying the process so much, it turned into a full album. And then we immediately started working on the second album. And then Trevor, the producer in New York who I was working with, decided that we'd make it into a trilogy of albums. And yeah, we felt that it just felt like that project had run its course at that point. It was perfect at that, and even that Final Reflections album, it ends with 2 tracks that are remixes of the very first 2 tracks we ever did for the project. So it just brought it full circle. So yeah, it just worked for us as a project of 3 albums.
Great. Anything else you wanted to ask Peter, Frank, and Greg?
We covered it.
Great. Well,
yeah,
once again, we're going to have links for everything. I encourage everyone to check out Peter's book. As I gushed about this a few times already, it is truly one of the best musical autobiographies that I read. Just a real positive, just reflection on a great career, the past and the present. Peter, we thank you for all the work that you put out. hearing us three nerds here talking about all these tracks. It's just exciting to bounce this all off you and kind of accentuate all this great work. And we're happy being vinyl collectors. We're happy that Pathways and Dawns is now got re-released on vinyl. What did that ended up, that experience of the vinyl, how did that come to fruition actually to get that one reissued on vinyl?
Just simply a Russian label called Infinite Fog. The guy Nick, who runs the company, just contacted me out of the blue one day and said, I'd love to put this out on vinyl. And I never heard of the company before, didn't know anything about them. But when I looked up, they had quite an interesting range of stuff that they'd done in the past, including a couple of Lisa's solo albums. And some stuff by Coil and various other, bands that I knew of from back in the day. And so I thought the deal was just do a limited edition of 300 albums, and it was just straight. Well, in actual fact, he offered me a fee, or I think it was 60 copies of the album. So I said, I'll take the 60 copies of the album.
Yeah.
So I got 60 vinyl albums, which was lovely, and it was fantastic to have the opportunity to get that onto vinyl all those years later, and then completely by surprise, he said to me, for remastering it for the vinyl edition, can you send the master tape to Martin Bowes, who I'm sure you know Martin from Attrition, who's also in the UK like me. So again, another former project artist from the time that we were on the label together. And so it was another kind of reconnection from the past. I think the last time I'd been in contact with Martin was when we were doing that the Project 200 compilation that you were showing earlier. So he remastered it and made a great job of it. And then I also had to, because obviously when we only had the original artwork for the CD size, and as often happens when you try and blow that artwork up to the size for a 12-inch, it loses definition and doesn't work. So I managed to track down Tim O'Donnell, who worked with Vaughan for a while at V23, and also had been part of Style Rouge. And he redid the cover for me as a favor and made a really beautiful job of it, I think. It was a wonderful experience, and it's lovely to have that on vinyl after all this time.
Yeah, Martin, I've met Martin a few times. We played with Attrition years and at least almost 20 years ago. He mastered the Dear Tired Friends Audra album. He did the remastering of our Going to the Theater, which which Frank has there. We had the same issue, Peter, with it was all scaled for CD. We didn't know in 2000 in early 2000s that 20 years from now this is going to be on vinyl. I would have loved it at the time. So we went through the same process. And it's funny you brought up Timothy O'Donnell as well, because when we signed to Project, Sam was going to have Timothy do the artwork for the first Audra album, and it ended up not happening, and then it got done kind of collaboratively. But that would have been cool as well. But yeah, he did a great job on the recreation of the artwork. That's something outside of my skill set. So I'm always amazed when these graphic designers can bring things back to life from such a tiny thing into that 12 by 12. So I also want to mention then Peter's other soul album, Enter the Mysterium, which came out in City Canyon in 2005. the Peter Ulrich collaboration albums, The Painted Caravan in 2013, Tempest Fugitives in 2015, and then The Final Reflection in 2019. Links all below in the description, so I encourage everyone to check it out. And once again, Drumming with Dead Can Dance and Parallel Adventures, to be sure to get yourself a copy of that. So thank you, Greg, Frank, Peter. It was an absolute pleasure to chat with you guys and talk about all this. And for those of you watching, thanks for sticking with us 2.5 hours or whatever we may be. I know it's getting late for you, Peter, out there, so we appreciate you hanging in there. So anyways, thank you all for watching. Look forward to reading your comments. See you soon.